I gave my daughter a dream villa, but her husband's family took over what one line did to make them leave. Welcome to Sororities TH. In today's video, we're diving deep into the effects of emotional abuse and how it impacts not just your relationships, but your very sense of self-worth. If you've ever found yourself feeling trapped or manipulated, this video is for you. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Sororities TH, and hit the bell for updates on more empowering content. The gift that turned into a nightmare. Imagine the excitement and pride of gifting your daughter a beautiful, fully renovated home as a wedding present. You've watched her grow, and as a parent, you want to ensure her happiness and stability in her new life. You envision her marriage as a joyous, elegant chapter in her life, one that reflects all your hopes for her future. The house is everything you dreamed for her, something she could build a life in, something that would symbolize her new beginning. You go above and beyond to make sure it's perfect, investing your time and hard-earned money into every detail, every corner. You want it to be a place where she will feel secure and cherished. But then, the unexpected happens, and what was supposed to be a dream gift turns into a nightmare. This is exactly what happened when I gave my daughter Emma a beautiful house as a wedding gift. I thought it was the perfect gesture, something to help her start her marriage with stability and elegance. But I never anticipated the way her soon-to-be husband, Nick, and his family would invade her life, overstep boundaries, and treat her gift as something that could be taken for granted. From the moment the wedding gift was given, the honeymoon phase of this new marriage quickly spiraled into something unrecognizable. Nick and his family, who had no financial contribution to the wedding, no home of their own, and barely made ends meet in their small rural town, saw Emma's new house not as a gift, but as an opportunity. They didn't approach it with gratitude or humility. Instead, they arrived with entitlement, moving in as though they owned the place. The first sign of trouble came almost immediately after the wedding, when Nick's family showed up uninvited and began taking over. As soon as they stepped into the house, Nick's mother, Mrs. Miller, couldn't contain her disdain. The neighborhood, she remarked, looked like a prison with everyone's doors shut tight. She immediately demanded changes, saying that the front gate, which was meant to add privacy and security to the house, should be torn down. It was just the beginning of an ongoing stream of complaints and demands from Nick's family. Mrs. Miller wasn't shy about sharing her opinion on everything from the interior decor to the layout of the house. Her tone was harsh and dismissive, as if she expected Emma to cater to her every whim, as if the house was there to serve her needs, not as a sanctuary for Emma to enjoy. Every step she took was with an air of entitlement, as if she were inspecting a hotel room, not a gift given by Emma's parents. Nick, once a seemingly polite and well-mannered boyfriend, had become silent in the face of his family's behavior. I watched him retreat into himself, his spine curving as if the weight of his family's actions was too much for him to bear. At first, I tried to be patient. After all, it was their wedding day, and things were bound to be chaotic. But as the days went on, it became clear that they had no plans to leave. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't even offer gratitude. Instead, they claimed rooms in the house, including the master bedroom, and treated Emma like an outsider in her own home. It was clear they thought they were entitled to everything, from the largest bedroom to the key decisions in Emma's life. Mrs. Miller even mocked the wedding gifts, calling them unnecessary and wasteful. To her, nothing mattered more than her own comfort and status, and she wasn't even remotely concerned about respecting the kindness Emma's parents had shown by gifting them such an expensive house. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the house only grew. Emma tried to keep the peace, always polite and accommodating, trying to find ways to make her in-laws feel comfortable. She offered solutions, like suggesting they visit the local community center, but Mrs. Miller just scoffed at the idea. Nothing Emma did seem to satisfy her. The idea of living in harmony with the people who were supposed to become family was slowly becoming an illusion. But what broke me completely was when Mr. Miller, after taking no responsibility for his actions, decided to claim the house as if it were his own. He didn't ask, he demanded. He didn't show appreciation for what had been done for him. Instead, he just walked into the master bedroom, took a seat, and claimed it as his own. At that moment, I realized that I had given my daughter more than just a house. I had inadvertently given her a burden, an emotional weight that she would have to carry for the rest of her life if she allowed her in-laws to continue treating her and her family like this. The quiet discomfort in Emma's eyes as she tried to make things work was heart-wrenching. She wasn't just dealing with an insensitive husband. She was being pushed around by a family that seemed to think they could walk all over her. As they continued to make demands and act as if they had no regard for the boundaries Emma had set, I knew it was time for her to take stand. In that crucial moment, I knew I had to speak up for Emma. I knew that if I didn't, this family would walk all over her, and she would lose herself in the process. So, I did what I had to do. I confronted Mr. Miller. I told him in no uncertain terms that the house was not his to take, and that Emma was not his to control. His family's behavior was out of line, and it was time for them to respect the boundaries Emma had set. The moment was tense, the air thick with the weight of our confrontation. But as soon as I spoke, I saw something in Emma's eyes shift. There was a spark of strength, a sense of purpose that had been hidden under the weight of her silence. She stepped forward and joined me in standing up to her future in-laws. It was one of the hardest moments for me as a parent, but it was also one of the most empowering. I had been silent for too long, letting my daughter deal with things on her own, trying to shield her from conflict. But sometimes, standing up for your children means helping them face the reality of their situation, even when it's difficult. As we spoke, Emma grew stronger. She told her fiancé, Nick, that the house was a gift from her parents, and it wasn't going to be used as a boarding house for his entire family. She demanded they leave, and for the first time, she was the one setting boundaries, not just for them, but for herself. After that day, things began to change. Nick's family began to retreat, no longer assuming they had the right to claim everything for themselves. Nick, however, was a different story. He couldn't understand why Emma had stood up for herself, and he began to pull away, still tethered to his family's expectations. As the days went by, Emma began to realize that this wasn't the kind of marriage she had envisioned. She was no longer willing to tolerate the disrespect, and so she made the difficult decision to call off the wedding. It wasn't easy for her, but it was the right choice. No longer would she live in the shadows of Nick's family's demands and expectations. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her future. In the end, Emma learned that sometimes love isn't enough. Respect, trust, and boundaries are just as essential. The house that was meant to be a symbol of love and new beginnings had become a reminder of the price of compromising too much. But in the end, Emma walked away from it all, stronger, more self-assured, and ready to live her life on her own terms. That experience taught her, and me, an invaluable lesson. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your children is to help them stand up for themselves, even when it's hard. The eye-opening journey of standing up for oneself, giving your child the gift of a home, is one of the greatest gestures a parent can offer, a symbol of love, stability, and the hope that they will have a place to build their own life. As parents, we imagine our children starting their own families in a beautiful house, where they can thrive, feel safe, and create memories that last a lifetime. That's exactly what I hoped for when I gave my daughter, Emma, a fully renovated home as her wedding gift. But what I didn't anticipate was how the marriage would unravel, how her soon-to-be husband, Nick, and his family would take this gift and transform it into something far more complicated. What should have been a joyous and elegant beginning for Emma and her future husband quickly turned into an emotional battlefield, one that tested the very fabric of our family. Emma's relationship with Nick seemed to be the perfect match at first. Nick appeared to be a decent, respectful boyfriend, polite, attentive, and easy to approve of as a parent. However, his family's behavior, especially his parents' attitude, revealed a much different story. Nick came from a family with no significant financial means, and while they lived in a rural town and scraped by with odd jobs, they never contributed anything to the wedding. Yet, they didn't hesitate for a second to assume that Emma's family would provide everything for them. When Emma and Nick decided to get married, I offered them my gift of a beautiful house in the Boston suburbs. hoping it would serve as a foundation for their new life together. I worked tirelessly with my husband, Thomas, to ensure that every detail was perfect down to the custom finishes, the renovations, and the entire design of the house. It was my way of ensuring Emma would never struggle, that she would have a beautiful place to call home with her new husband. However, the moment Nick's family stepped into the house, things began to take a turn for the worse. His mother, Mrs. Miller, immediately began criticizing the house. From the moment they arrived, she made sure to voice her displeasure. She mocked the neighborhood, calling it a prison for being too quiet, and demanded that the front gate, which had been installed for security, be torn down. She didn't see it as a thoughtful feature. Instead, she treated it as something that needed to be changed immediately. It wasn't the type of gratitude I expected. It was as if she thought Emma's home was just another possession for her to control. This was only the beginning of their entitlement. Instead of showing appreciation for the beautiful gift, Nick's family began acting like they had every right to take what they wanted. Mrs. Miller demanded the master bedroom, claiming it for herself, and even instructed Emma to handle all the chores. It became clear that they saw my daughter as nothing more than a servant, rather than a wife. Emma, ever the peacemaker, tried to keep the situation civil. She made suggestions for compromise, such as offering her in-laws access to the community center and other resources nearby, but nothing seemed to satisfy them. Mrs. Miller continued her tirade, dismissing Emma's kindness, and instead acting as though she was entitled to control the entire house. Even worse, Emma's soon-to-be husband, Nick, stood there silently, not once defending her. His behavior seemed to shift from that of a respectful partner to someone who was more concerned with appeasing his family than standing up for his fiancée. At that moment, Emma found herself not only dealing with the stress of a wedding and a new life, but also the overwhelming weight of her future in-laws' demands. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't stand by and watch it happen. As the days went on, the tension in the house grew. I couldn't stand seeing Emma so disrespected, so small in the face of such entitlement. My daughter, who had always been strong, was being broken down bit by bit by a family that didn't appreciate her or the sacrifices she had made for Nick. But I realized that if I didn't speak up, no one would. So I decided to confront Mr. Miller, Nick's father, and set boundaries once and for all. I told him in no uncertain terms that the house was a gift for Emma and Nick to start their life together, not for his entire family to take over. I made it clear that they had no right to take control of Emma's home, no right to treat her like an outsider in her own house. The moment I spoke up, I saw a shift in Emma. Her expression changed. There was a fire in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was reclaiming her future. Emma joined me in confronting Nick's parents. She told them in no uncertain terms that the house was a gift from her parents, not a free-for-all for them to control. She told them they were crossing the line, and this wasn't going to be tolerated. For the first time, Emma set boundaries, something she had been avoiding for months, and it was empowering to watch. It was the first sign of her taking back control of her life, and I couldn't have been prouder. Nick, however, didn't react the way I had hoped. His face went pale, and he seemed completely caught off guard. Instead of defending Emma, he shrunk under his parents' pressure, unable to take the stand he should have. The lack of support from him only confirmed what Emma had been feeling all along. She wasn't just marrying into a family that didn't respect her. She was marrying a man who was too afraid to stand up for her. After the confrontation, Emma made the decision to call off the wedding. It wasn't easy for her, and I could see the pain in her eyes, but deep down, she knew it was the right choice. She realized that no amount of love or sacrifice was worth the constant disrespect from Nick and his family. She knew that if she went forward with the marriage, she would lose herself. She would be swallowed up by their demands and their lack of respect. And so, she ended things with Nick. It was a heartbreaking decision, but it was also a necessary one. She had to find herself again, to reclaim her own happiness and peace, even if it meant walking away from a relationship she had fought for. What followed was a difficult period of healing. Emma struggled to come to terms with the fact that she had given so much of herself to someone who didn't value her. She had sacrificed her boundaries, her sense of self, and her peace for someone who couldn't appreciate her. But with time, she grew stronger. She started focusing on her career, picking up multiple projects at once, and thriving under pressure. She became more confident, more certain of what she wanted from life and what she would no longer tolerate. Her growth was evident to everyone around her, especially when she was chosen to represent her company at a major industry event. Her confidence and poise left a lasting impression, and she quickly gained the respect of industry leaders. It was at this event that Emma met Ethan, a co-founder of a well-known investment firm. He was everything Nick wasn't: respectful, intelligent, and genuinely interested in Emma for who she was, not for what she could offer. Their connection was immediate, but it wasn't forced. It was a slow, natural evolution based on mutual respect and shared values. For the first time in a long while, Emma was in a relationship that wasn't based on compromise or emotional turmoil. She felt valued, seen, and heard. And for the first time, she realized that she deserved that respect, that love, and that care. But even after everything, Curtis wasn't ready to let Emma go. He sent her a series of manipulative emails, demanding that she pay him back for every coffee, every meal, every ride he had ever paid for during their time together. His arrogance and entitlement were unbearable. But Emma didn't give in. She took action, getting a lawyer involved and demanding that Curtis stop contacting her. The final straw came when he sent her a letter filled with emotional manipulation, trying to pull at her heartstrings and guilt her into coming back. But Emma had already moved on. She had learned to love herself, to stand up for herself, and to never settle for less than she deserved. This story is a testament to the strength it takes to stand up for yourself when faced with manipulation, entitlement, and disrespect. Emma's journey wasn't easy, but in the end, it was worth every step. She learned that real love isn't about sacrifice or compromise. It's about mutual respect, understanding, and shared growth. She's now a woman who knows what she deserves, and she's living her life on her own terms. And that, in the end, is the greatest victory of all. A journey of self-discovery and strength. A mother's stand as a parent. There are few gifts that carry more weight than offering your child a home, something you hope will serve as a symbol of your love, a foundation for their future. This is what I thought when I gave my daughter, Emma, a fully renovated house as a wedding gift. I had imagined it would be a place for her and her future husband to build a beautiful life together, to create memories, and to settle into a future full of promise. What I didn't expect, however, was how quickly the dynamics of this gift would unravel. It became clear, far too soon, that the man she was marrying, along with his family, would take more than just a house. They would take control of everything, and not in a way that respected Emma's dignity or the sacrifices we had made for her. When Emma first introduced me to Nick, her soon-to-be husband, he seemed to be a kind, polite, and respectable young man. He was attentive to Emma, thoughtful in his actions, and seemed to check all the boxes of what any parent would want for their child. However, things began to change as we got to know his family. Nick's parents, particularly his mother, Mrs. Miller, exhibited a sense of entitlement and an almost complete lack of gratitude, which shocked and disappointed me. While Emma and Nick had started their life together with little in the way of material wealth, Nick didn't have a car. His family didn't have a home of their own. The gift I offered was a house that we had poured our hearts into. Every detail was carefully chosen and renovated to perfection, from the high-end finishes to the spacious layout. This house was not just a gift. It was a symbol of our love and care for Emma. But as soon as Nick's family stepped into the house, they began to behave as though it was theirs to take over. Mrs. Miller immediately began to criticize the house, commenting that the neighborhood felt too quiet, as if it were some sort of prison, and demanded that we tear down the front gate for being too secure. She wasn't just offering suggestions, she was issuing commands, treating Emma's home as if it were an extension of her own. She was dismissive, condescending, and showed no appreciation for the effort we had put into making the house perfect for Emma. Her sense of entitlement didn't stop there. She had her eyes set on the master bedroom and assumed that she could claim it for herself, with no regard for the fact that this was Emma's gift, her new life. I could see Emma trying to manage the situation, her natural inclination to keep the peace coming to the forefront. She attempted to suggest that Nick's parents engage with the community and get involved in the social events around the neighborhood, offering a more welcoming way to feel at home. But Mrs. Miller continued to push back, disregarding Emma's suggestions and creating an atmosphere of discomfort and entitlement. It wasn't just Mrs. Miller's behavior that troubled me. It was the fact that Nick stood by, silent, not defending Emma or standing up to his parents. His lack of action, his submission to his family's demands, made me question the foundation of this relationship. Was this really the man who would stand by Emma's side through thick and thin? The tension in the house continued to build, and my frustration with Nick's family grew. They didn't just expect Emma to give up her home, they demanded that she give up her autonomy, her dignity, and her voice. This wasn't just about a physical house. It was about control, respect, and boundaries. I couldn't sit idly by while my daughter was being treated like an outsider in her own home, and I knew that if I didn't intervene, no one would. I had to speak up, so I did. I confronted Mr. Miller, Nick's father, and made it clear that the house was a gift for Emma, not a free-for-all for his entire family. I set a boundary, telling him that if they wanted to live in the house, they would have to contribute financially, emotionally, and responsibly. They couldn't take over Emma's life and home without any consideration of what it meant to her. It was a turning point. Emma, witnessing my stance, began to find her own voice. She, too, stepped forward, telling her future in-laws that this was not their house to control. She set the boundary that they could not walk all over her and take advantage of her kindness any longer. I saw the shift in her demeanor, the confidence in her voice. She had begun to realize her worth, that she wasn't obligated to tolerate disrespect just because she loved Nick. She wasn't just the dutiful daughter-in-law waiting for approval. She was a woman who deserved respect, autonomy, and dignity. I couldn't have been prouder of her in that moment. It was a sign of growth, strength, and the beginning of her stepping into her own life fully. But it wasn't easy for Emma. She had poured so much of herself into her relationship with Nick, trying to make things work despite the obvious challenges with his family. She had silenced herself for so long to keep the peace, to avoid rocking the boat. But as she began to set boundaries, she realized that her needs mattered too. She didn't have to sacrifice herself for someone else's comfort. The emotional toll, however, was significant. It took everything in her to finally recognize that this wasn't a healthy relationship, that Nick wasn't the partner she had thought he was. After the confrontation, Emma made the difficult decision to end her engagement with Nick. It wasn't a choice she made lightly. She had invested so much emotionally into their relationship, and breaking it off felt like tearing a part of herself away. But deep down, she knew it was the right decision. She had begun to see Nick for who he truly was, someone who lacked the strength to stand up for her, who was more concerned with appeasing his family than with protecting the woman he loved. She realized that she didn't need to sacrifice herself to make the relationship work. And that was the most empowering realization she could have had. In the aftermath of the breakup, Emma went through a period of healing, trying to come to terms with what had happened. She had been so blinded by love that she hadn't seen the warning signs. The emotional residue of the relationship lingered, and it was hard to let go. But she began to focus on herself. She threw herself into her career, taking on more projects, and proving her worth at work. She became stronger, more confident, and more certain of who she was and what she wanted from life. Her sense of self-worth grew as she learned to trust her instincts and set clear boundaries. Her journey of self-discovery led to a new chapter when she was chosen to represent her company at a major industry event. It was a defining moment, one that demonstrated her ability to thrive under pressure and gain the respect of industry leaders. During the event, she met Ethan, a successful businessman with a background that seemed more aligned with her own. Their conversations were easy and natural, without the pressure of expectations or ulterior motives. Over time, their connection deepened, not because of their careers, but because of who they were as people. Ethan respected Emma for her independence, strength, and intelligence. And for the first time in a long while, Emma felt valued for who she truly was. She had found someone who appreciated her, not for what she could give him, but for who she was. As their relationship blossomed, Emma continued to grow, learning the true meaning of self-love and mutual respect. She was no longer the woman who compromised her needs for someone else's convenience. She had learned that a healthy relationship is based on equality, respect, and mutual understanding. But even after all of this, the remnants of her past relationship with Nick lingered. Curtis continued to make attempts to re-enter her life, manipulating her emotions and trying to guilt her into taking him back. When that didn't work, he resorted to spreading false rumors and emotional blackmail. But Emma, having learned from her past mistakes, didn't let him back into her life. She stood strong, filed a restraining order, and continued to move forward with her life, finally free of the toxic hold he had once had on her. Emma's journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. She learned that real love isn't about sacrifice, compromise, or financial gifts. It's about respect, equality, and finding someone who truly values you for who you are. And in the end, she found that love not from someone else, but from herself. The real revenge wasn't in seeking retribution, but in living a life of happiness, self-love, and fulfillment. It was in walking away from the past, standing tall, and never looking back. Emma's journey is a reminder that we are all worthy of love, respect, and happiness, and that we should never settle for less than we deserve. A mother's heartfelt stand. Navigating family, love, and boundaries. There are moments in life when you make a decision with the best of intentions, only to have it unravel in ways you could never have predicted. This is what happened when I gave my daughter, Emma, a home as a wedding gift. I wanted it to be a symbol of my love for her, a place where she and her future husband could build their life together, free from the stresses that often come with starting out. I envisioned a new chapter for her, one where she and Nick, her soon-to-be husband, could settle down in peace and joy. What I didn't expect was how quickly everything would spiral out of control. Nick seemed like the perfect match for Emma. At first polite, attentive, and respectful. He made every effort to connect with me and Thomas, my husband. He was exactly the kind of man we had hoped Emma would choose, and we were happy to welcome him into the family. But as the wedding day approached, we began to notice signs that things were not as ideal as they seemed. Nick's family, particularly his mother, Mrs. Miller, quickly revealed their true colors. While Emma and Nick had little in terms of material wealth when they started their relationship, the house I gave them was meant to be a fresh start, a space where they could thrive. But when Nick's family arrived, it became clear that they saw the house as something entirely different, not as a gift to Emma, but as a resource to be exploited. From the moment they stepped inside the house, I could see the entitlement in Mrs. Miller's eyes. She immediately began criticizing the house, calling it a prison because the neighborhood was too quiet. She demanded that we tear down the front gate, as she believed it looked like a fortress. She didn't even pretend to appreciate the effort and care Thomas and I had put into making this house perfect for Emma. Instead, she looked at it as though she had a right to change everything. Her condescending comments didn't stop there. She continued to make demands, acting as though she had ownership of the house, not Emma. And Nick, who I had hoped would stand by Emma's side, said nothing. He said it was just his mother being his mother, nothing to be concerned about. But I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was hard for me to watch Emma, the daughter I had raised, remain silent in the face of such disrespect. She tried her best to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation, but I knew deep down that if she didn't set boundaries now, this behavior would only escalate. So I stepped in. I made it clear that the house was not for them to take over. I stood up for Emma and for our family, and I made it clear that they could not claim ownership of something that was meant for Emma and Nick's future, not for his entire family. I told Mrs. Miller, in no uncertain terms, that if they wanted to stay in the house, they would have to contribute financially and emotionally. This was Emma's home, and she deserved to have control over it, especially since it had been a gift meant to support her, not her in-laws. The tension in the house grew, but Emma started to find her voice. She stepped forward and told her future in-laws that this was not how things were going to be. She set boundaries, and for the first time, I saw her stand up for herself with strength and clarity. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Emma had always been the kind of person who prioritized harmony over conflict, but she had begun to see that her needs mattered too. She didn't have to be the one to give in all the time. She didn't have to compromise her happiness for the sake of others' comfort. And that was when everything changed. But despite Emma's growing strength, the emotional toll of the situation became undeniable. She had invested so much in her relationship with Nick, and it wasn't easy to walk away from that investment. She had believed in their future together, and breaking up with him wasn't something she had planned. But deep down, she knew that this relationship, with its toxic family dynamics and Nick's unwillingness to stand up for her, wasn't the healthy partnership she had hoped for. The final straw came when Emma realized that Nick had never truly supported her. He had allowed his family to walk all over her without stepping in. His lack of action spoke volumes, and Emma knew that this relationship wasn't worth fighting for anymore. She ended her engagement with Nick, and while it was one of the hardest decisions she had ever made, it was also one of the most empowering. Emma's journey of healing was not instantaneous. She had to rebuild her sense of self-worth, and it wasn't easy. For years, she had compromised her own happiness for the sake of a relationship that wasn't fulfilling her. But as she focused more on herself, she began to find her footing again. She threw herself into her career, taking on more responsibilities and proving to herself that she could thrive on her own. She learned that her worth wasn't defined by a relationship, by Nick's family, or by anyone else. She was worthy of respect, love, and happiness on her own terms. Emma's transformation was remarkable. She became more confident, more assertive, and more in touch with who she truly was. Her career took off in a way it hadn't before, and she began to gain the respect of her peers in a way that was long overdue. But even as Emma flourished in her career, her journey wasn't over. She continued to heal, learning to let go of the past and the emotional weight it carried. It wasn't until the regional business conference that Emma's life took a major turn. She was chosen to represent her company at the event, and it was there that she met Ethan Parker. Ethan was different. He was thoughtful, composed, and respectful, everything Nick had never been. Their connection was natural, not forced, and it quickly blossomed into something more. Ethan respected Emma for who she was, not for what she could provide. He valued her independence, her intelligence, and her strength. Unlike Nick, Ethan didn't see Emma as someone to be controlled. He saw her as an equal, someone with whom he could build a future based on mutual respect and love. And Emma, for the first time in a long time, began to feel like she was in a relationship that didn't require her to sacrifice her dignity or her boundaries. As their relationship grew, Emma began to realize something important. Love was not about sacrificing yourself for someone else. It was about mutual respect, trust, and support. With Ethan, she found a partnership that allowed her to be herself fully. She no longer had to hide her ambitions, her needs, or her dreams. Ethan embraced her for all that she was, and that was a love that was real, genuine, and empowering. But even with the growth Emma had experienced, Curtis's attempts to re-enter her life didn't stop. He resorted to emotional blackmail, spreading false rumors and demanding money from her in an email. It was a pathetic attempt to manipulate her, but Emma didn't let it affect her. She didn't give him the power he once had. She stood firm, filing a restraining order and taking legal action. She wasn't going to let him back into her life, and she wasn't going to let his toxic behavior define her any longer. As Emma continued to heal and rebuild, she began to realize just how much she had grown. She had gone from a woman who had tried to please everyone and hide her true self to a woman who was unapologetically herself. She was no longer the woman who let others walk all over her. She was no longer the woman who sacrificed her happiness for the sake of a relationship. She was a woman who knew her worth, who had learned to set boundaries, and who was finally living life on her own terms. And that, in the end, was the most beautiful transformation of all. Emma had walked away from a toxic relationship, built herself back up, and found love in a way she never thought possible. She had learned the most important lesson of all. Love doesn't come from someone else, it comes from within. It's about knowing your worth, setting boundaries, and finding someone who will love you for exactly who you are. And that's what Emma found in Ethan, a love that was built on respect, trust, and mutual support. Emma's journey wasn't easy, but it was worth every step. She had finally learned to love herself first, and in doing so, she had found the love and happiness she had always deserved. A mother's courageous stand, a story of boundaries, growth, and healing as parents. We often make decisions with the best of intentions, hoping they will provide our children with the foundation they need to build a happy and prosperous life. I made one such decision when I gave my daughter, Emma, a beautiful home as a wedding gift. I thought it would be the perfect symbol of my love and support, a fresh start for her and her soon-to-be husband, Nick. I wanted them to have a comfortable space to build their future, free from the burdens that many couples face when starting their lives together. But what I never could have predicted was how quickly everything would unravel, revealing the true nature of the people my daughter had chosen to surround herself with. Nick had always seemed like the ideal partner for Emma. He was polite, attentive, and respectful. His charm and seemingly humble demeanor made him someone we were willing to welcome into our family. His quiet confidence gave me hope that he would be a good match for my daughter, someone who would cherish and support her as she deserved. However, it wasn't long before we began to notice troubling signs that I wished I'd seen sooner. Nick's family, particularly his mother, Mrs. Miller, quickly showed their true colors. They saw the house we gave Emma as nothing more than a resource to be exploited, not a gift meant to support her new life with Nick. From the moment Nick's parents arrived at the house, I could see their entitlement. Mrs. Miller immediately began to criticize the home, calling the quiet neighborhood a prison and demanding changes to the front gate. She even suggested tearing it down because it looked like a fortress. She made it clear that she didn't care about the thought, time, and money Thomas and I had invested in making the house perfect for Emma. Instead, she acted as if the house belonged to her, not Emma. Nick, who had been silent up until then, shrugged it off, claiming his mother was just being lively and that we shouldn't take her complaints seriously. But the more I watched, the more I realized that this wasn't just about a difference in opinions, it was about disrespect. It was about their belief that they were entitled to everything, including Emma's generosity. At that moment, I knew I had to step in. I couldn't stand by and watch Emma, the daughter I had raised with so much love, continue to tolerate such blatant disrespect. Emma had always been the kind of person who avoided conflict, who tried to keep the peace even at the expense of her own well-being. But I could see the toll it was taking on her. She was becoming a shadow of herself, unsure of where she stood in her own home, in her own marriage. She needed to set boundaries, and she needed to do it now. I confronted Mrs. Miller, making it clear that this house was a gift for Emma and Nick, and it was their home, not her family's to take over. I reminded her that this was not a boarding house, and if she wanted to stay in the house, she would have to contribute. She couldn't just waltz in and start making demands. At first, Emma was hesitant. She didn't want to rock the boat, especially not in front of Nick, who remained strangely quiet. But I stood firm, and to my relief, Emma slowly began to find her voice. She agreed with me, and together we made it clear to Nick's family that their behavior was unacceptable. They couldn't just walk in and act like they owned the place. Emma wasn't a doormat, and it was time they understood that. The weeks that followed were challenging. Emma had always been the one to give in, to compromise, to try to keep everyone happy. But now, she was learning to stand up for herself, to set boundaries, and to demand the respect she deserved. I watched with a mixture of pride and sadness as Emma began to unravel the truth about her relationship with Nick and his family. She had spent so much time and energy trying to please them, trying to make things work, but all she had received in return was disrespect. It was painful for me to see her go through this, but it was also incredibly empowering. Emma was finally learning that she didn't have to put up with mistreatment, that she didn't have to be the one who always compromised. But as much as she was growing, the emotional scars left by Nick's family were still there. She had invested so much into their relationship, into making it work, that walking away wasn't easy. It was hard for her to admit that Nick, the man she had loved and trusted, was not the partner she thought he was. It was even harder to acknowledge that his family, who had so quickly ingratiated themselves into her life, didn't care about her, didn't care about her happiness or her well-being. They cared only about themselves and what they could take from her. But Emma did something that I couldn't be prouder of. She ended the engagement. She walked away from Nick and his toxic family, and while it hurt, it was the best decision she could have made. The healing process was slow, but it was steady. Emma threw herself into her work, into rebuilding her confidence and sense of self-worth. She no longer allowed herself to be defined by Nick's actions or the expectations of his family. She learned that her worth didn't come from her relationship with a man or her ability to please others. It came from within. She began to thrive, both professionally and personally. Emma learned to trust herself again, to make decisions that were best for her, and to let go of the toxic influences that had once clouded her judgment. As Emma began to reclaim her life, she found strength in her own independence. She learned that love wasn't about compromising who you are for someone else's sake. True love, she discovered, was about mutual respect, understanding, and partnership. And the moment she realized this was when her life began to change. She no longer had to hide her achievements, her ambitions, or her dreams. She embraced who she was fully and unapologetically. And that confidence began to attract the right people into her life. One of those people was Ethan Parker, a successful entrepreneur who had seen Emma's presentation at a business conference. Unlike Nick, Ethan was respectful, supportive, and genuinely interested in Emma as a person, not as a means to an end. Their connection grew slowly but steadily, and Emma found herself in a relationship that was based on mutual admiration, trust, and respect. Ethan didn't expect her to change or sacrifice her goals for him. Instead, he encouraged her to keep pursuing her dreams, to keep growing, and to continue being the person she had become. For the first time in a long while, Emma felt like she had found someone who truly valued her. But even as Emma began to heal and build a new life, Curtis wasn't done trying to insert himself back into her world. He resorted to emotional blackmail, spreading lies about her, and demanding repayment for things he claimed he had paid for during their relationship. Emma didn't let it faze her. She had already moved on, and she wasn't about to let Curtis drag her back into his toxic world. She filed for a restraining order, ensuring that he couldn't harass her again. It was a difficult process, but Emma knew it was necessary. She had already lost so much time to Curtis and his family's manipulations, and she wasn't going to let them take any more from her. Emma's journey wasn't an easy one, but it was one of growth, healing, and empowerment. She learned that she didn't have to settle for less than she deserved, that she didn't have to put up with mistreatment or sacrifice her happiness for the sake of others. She learned to trust herself, to set boundaries, and to walk away from relationships that didn't serve her. And in doing so, she created a life that was hers, one where she could thrive, love, and be loved in return. In the end, Emma found peace not because she had forgiven Curtis or his family, but because she had forgiven herself. She had learned that the only love that truly mattered was the love she gave herself. And with that realization, she had finally stepped into her power, reclaiming her life and her future. No longer bound by the expectations of others, Emma was free to be the person she had always been meant to be. And that, in the end, was the most beautiful gift she could have given herself. The transformative power of boundaries, a story of self-discovery, strength, and independence. Life has a way of testing our boundaries. Whether in relationships, work, or family dynamics, we are constantly faced with the challenge of deciding what we will tolerate and what we will not. As parents, we often believe that the decisions we make for our children will lead them to happiness, security, and success. But sometimes, despite our best intentions, those decisions can lead us into unexpected territory where we must confront the realities of the choices we've made, not only for ourselves, but also for our children. This is a story about a mother, her daughter, and the boundaries that ultimately became the key to their healing and growth. When I gave my daughter, Olivia, a beautiful home as a wedding gift, I believed I was giving her everything she needed to start a new chapter of her life. Olivia had met Jonathan, a seemingly charming and polite young man, and together They seemed like the perfect match. Olivia was always thoughtful, caring, and willing to give everything for the one she loved. Her heart was full of hope, and she believed in the idea of family, of building something together, something lasting. As a mother, I wanted to ensure that she had a strong foundation to begin her marriage. So I gave her the gift of a house, a lovely home, where she could build her future with Jonathan. I hoped it would be a place of peace, love, and growth. But what I did not expect was how quickly the situation would devolve, revealing the true colors of the people Olivia had chosen to bring into her life. Jonathan's family, especially his mother, Mrs. Miller, quickly began to make their presence known in ways that made me uncomfortable. From a very first moment they stepped into Olivia's new home, it became clear that they felt entitled to more than just the space they had been graciously given. They took over the house, claiming the master bedroom as their own and making disparaging remarks about the rest of the property. Mrs. Miller was quick to criticize every aspect of the house, from the neighborhood to the smallest details of the decor. It wasn't long before I realized that they saw Olivia not as a daughter-in-law to be cherished, but as a stepping stone to their own comfort and status. This wasn't the future I had envisioned for Olivia. She deserved better. She deserved respect, love, and a partnership built on equality, not manipulation. At first, Olivia tried to keep the peace. She didn't want to upset Jonathan or his family, so she endured their rudeness and disregard for her boundaries. She had always been the type to put others before herself, especially those she loved. But over time, it became increasingly clear that her kindness was being taken advantage of. Jonathan, who had once seemed so charming, was now turning a blind eye to his family's disrespect. He didn't defend Olivia. Instead, he shrank away from the conflict, choosing to placate his family rather than stand by the woman he claimed to love. Olivia, devastated by the realization that her marriage wasn't the partnership she had imagined, was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. Jonathan, despite his polite exterior, wasn't the man she had thought him to be. One day, after an especially humiliating encounter with Jonathan's parents, Olivia reached her breaking point. I had been watching the emotional toll this was taking on her, and I knew it was time for her to make a stand not just for herself, but for her future. It wasn't easy, but Olivia finally found the courage to speak up. She confronted Jonathan's family, setting clear boundaries for what she would and would not tolerate. The moment she stood up for herself was the moment she began to reclaim her life. No longer would she let them walk all over her, and no longer would she allow herself to be treated as an afterthought. It was a moment of profound self-realization, and I couldn't have been prouder of her. But the road to reclaiming her independence wasn't smooth, and it took time for Olivia to fully internalize what she had learned. She had spent so many years putting the needs of others before her own that it was hard to trust herself again, to believe that she had the right to put herself first. After confronting Jonathan and his family, Olivia made the difficult decision to end the engagement. It wasn't an easy choice, and it broke her heart, but she knew deep down that staying in a relationship where she wasn't valued, where her boundaries weren't respected, would only lead to further pain. It was time to let go and move on. It was time for Olivia to rebuild her life, to focus on herself, her career, and her personal growth. As her mother, I watched in awe as Olivia began to heal and rebuild her sense of self-worth. The transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Olivia began to thrive, both personally and professionally. She embraced her independence, took on new challenges, and started living life on her own terms. She was no longer the woman who would put up with mistreatment for the sake of others. She had learned to prioritize her own needs, to set boundaries, and to say no when necessary. The growth I witnessed in Olivia was empowering. She no longer let the expectations of others dictate her life. Instead of apologizing for her ambitions, she celebrated them. She realized that she was worthy of love, respect, and kindness, and she wasn't going to settle for less. Her career took off, and she quickly gained recognition for her work. She was confident, driven, and unapologetically herself. The woman who had once doubted her worth was now standing tall, unafraid of the world around her. But as Olivia flourished in her newfound independence, she found herself faced with a new challenge: emotional closure. Despite everything that had happened with Jonathan, she found herself still thinking about him, still carrying the emotional weight of their failed relationship. It wasn't love that lingered, it was the habit, the emotional residue of caring for someone who wasn't able to love her in return. Olivia struggled to let go of the past, to forgive herself for staying in a relationship that didn't serve her. But with time, she realized that healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about accepting, learning, and growing. She had to learn to let go of the past and embrace the future. As Olivia moved forward, she met someone new. Ethan was different from anyone she had ever known. He was kind, thoughtful, and supportive in ways that Jonathan had never been. Ethan didn't see Olivia as a project to fix, nor did he expect her change for him. He valued her for who she was, for her intelligence, her strength, and her compassion. With Ethan, Olivia began to experience what a healthy, supportive relationship could truly look like. There was no drama, no manipulation, no power struggles, just mutual respect and a shared desire to build a future together. But even as Olivia blossomed in this new relationship, Curtis, despite his many faults, still lingered in her life. He couldn't accept that their relationship was over, and he resorted to manipulation and emotional blackmail to try to get her back. He sent her threatening emails and showed up at her workplace, determined to create chaos. But Olivia, now stronger than ever, refused to engage with him. She had already moved on. She was no longer the person who would allow Curtis to control her or drag her back into his world of emotional turmoil. Instead, she took legal action to ensure he would no longer be able to harass her. This was the final step in her healing process, the realization that she had the power to control her own life, to cut ties with those who no longer served her, and to move forward without looking back. The final chapter of Olivia's journey was one of self-discovery and empowerment. She had learned the importance of setting boundaries, of not allowing anyone to define her worth. She had learned to trust herself again, to listen to her instincts, and to prioritize her own happiness. Most importantly, Olivia had learned that the love she had always longed for wasn't something that could be found outside herself. It was something she had to cultivate within. And once she did, everything else fell into place. Olivia's journey wasn't an easy one. There were moments of doubt, moments when she questioned whether she was doing the right thing. But she didn't give up. She continued to move forward, step by step, trusting that she would find her way. And in the end, she did. She found herself. She found her strength. And she found the love and respect she deserved, not from others, but from herself. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder that boundaries are not just about saying no to others, they are about saying yes to yourself. And when you do, everything changes. You find peace, you find clarity, and you find a freedom to live life on your own terms. This is the story of a woman who, through courage and self-discovery, transformed her life. It's a story of growth, healing, and the power of boundaries. And in the end, it's a story about love, the love you give to others, and, most importantly, the love you give to yourself. The power of boundaries, a journey to self-worth and empowerment in the intricate web of family dynamics. The line between love, duty, and respect often becomes blurred. This story begins with a mother's deep desire to ensure her daughter, Olivia, had everything she needed to begin her marriage with confidence and security. Olivia had met Jonathan, a man who initially seemed polite, well-mannered, and capable of offering her a stable future. As parents, we always want the best for our children, and we often believe that the choices they make will lead to their happiness. We pour our hearts and resources into ensuring their success, hoping to create a life for them that's filled with joy and prosperity. But life has a way of revealing things we never expected, things that can shake our perceptions and force us to reassess what truly matters. I had always believed that my daughter, Olivia, was someone deserving of respect and kindness. She had always been a loving, compassionate person, and when she fell in love with Jonathan, we saw their relationship as an opportunity to give her a foundation on which she could build a future. To make that foundation secure, we gave her a beautiful home, a generous wedding gift. Olivia had spent months dreaming of her new life, her new family, and the beautiful memories they would create in this new space. But what was meant to be a dream turned into a nightmare as the reality of Jonathan's family became clear. The first warning signs came almost immediately. Jonathan's parents, particularly his mother, Mrs. Miller, arrived at the house with an overwhelming sense of entitlement. They moved in without hesitation, disregarding the idea of privacy or personal space. They took the master bedroom, not asking, but demanding it, and began treating the house as if it were their own. I had spent years ensuring that Olivia's home was a sanctuary, a place where she could thrive and build a life with Jonathan. But within hours of their arrival, Mrs. Miller's criticism started. She complained about everything, from the neighborhood to the design of the house, as if she were inspecting a cheap motel. She scorned every decision we had made in an attempt to create a welcoming, elegant home for Olivia and her new family. At first, Olivia tried to keep the peace. She was always the peacemaker, the one who tried to make everyone happy, even if it meant sacrificing her own needs. She tried to please her new family, especially Jonathan, who had not yet stood up for her in any meaningful way. Her emotional exhaustion began to show. The more she tried to placate them, the more they took advantage of her kindness. It became apparent that Jonathan, despite his charming demeanor, was not the man I had hoped he would be. He was weak, lacking the backbone to stand up to his parents, and worse, he had no intention of protecting Olivia from their abuse. The more I watched Olivia shrink under the weight of Jonathan's family's expectations, the more frustrated I became. My heart ached for her, knowing that she deserved so much more than the treatment she was receiving. She had worked so hard for everything in her life, yet here she was being treated as if she were invisible in her own home. My love for her drove me to act. I had to ensure she understood her worth and that she had the power to change her situation. It was time for her to stop sacrificing her happiness for the sake of others. One day, after yet another humiliating encounter with Jonathan's parents, Olivia finally reached her breaking point. She could no longer ignore the way they treated her, nor could she continue to put up with Jonathan's lack of support. The moment she found the strength to stand up for herself was a turning point in her life. She confronted Jonathan's family, demanding respect and establishing the boundaries that had long been ignored. It wasn't easy for Olivia standing up to Jonathan, standing up to his parents, but she did it. And in that moment, I saw her transform. The timid, apologetic girl I had known was gone. She had found her voice, and with it, her strength. But this wasn't the end of Olivia's journey. Standing up for herself had been liberating, but it also forced her to confront the reality of her relationship with Jonathan. The truth was clear. He had never treated her as an equal. He had let his family dictate their lives, and now, it was too late to undo the damage. Olivia made the painful decision to end the engagement. It was a decision that shook her to the core, but it was the right one. She realized that no matter how much she loved him, she could not sacrifice her dignity and self-worth for someone who didn't value her in return. Olivia's decision to end the relationship wasn't just about Jonathan, it was about reclaiming her life. She had been living for others for so long that she had lost sight of her own needs. In the weeks that followed, I watched her rediscover herself. She started to focus on her career, her passions, and the things that made her happy. She took on new projects, built new friendships, and began to live life on her own terms. The transformation was profound. Olivia was no longer the person who would let others define her. She was independent, confident, and free from the constraints of her past. But even as Olivia grew stronger, she found herself dealing with the aftermath of her failed relationship. Despite the breakup, Jonathan wasn't ready to let go. He resorted to manipulation, attempting to guilt Olivia into taking him back. He sent threatening messages, showed up at her workplace, and tried to reassert control over her life. But Olivia, now empowered by her newfound strength, refused to engage with him. She took legal action to ensure that he would no longer have any contact with her, and she filed for a restraining order to protect herself from his harassment. The process of legal action wasn't easy for Olivia. She had never imagined that she would find herself in a situation where she needed to take such measures. But it was necessary. It was part of her healing, part of her journey to reclaim her life and her sense of security. Every step she took, no matter how difficult, was another step toward her independence. And with each step, she grew stronger. As Olivia moved forward, she encountered a new challenge: emotional closure. Although she had made the decision to end her relationship with Jonathan, she found herself still carrying emotional baggage from their time together. She struggled to let go of the time and energy she had invested in someone who had ultimately let her down. But as she continued to focus on her growth, she realized that closure wasn't about forgetting, it was about accepting what had happened and using the experience to learn and grow. One day, Olivia met someone new. Ethan was different from Jonathan, thoughtful, kind, and respectful in every way Jonathan had failed to be. Ethan didn't see Olivia as someone to be fixed, but as someone to be appreciated for who she was. There was no pressure, no manipulation, just a mutual respect for one another. As their relationship developed, Olivia found herself able to let go of the past, knowing that she deserved to be loved in a healthy, supportive way. But even as Olivia found love again, Jonathan wasn't done with her. He sent an email demanding money that he claimed Olivia owed him, listing every small expense he had ever paid for during their relationship. It was absurd. He was trying to extort her emotionally, turning their breakup into another way to control her. But Olivia, now fully aware of his manipulations, simply ignored him. She knew better than to give in to his games. As time passed, Olivia continued to thrive. She focused on her career, formed meaningful relationships, and embraced her independence. She was no longer the woman who defined herself through her relationships with others. She had become someone who defined herself by her own choices and actions. And in that transformation, Olivia realized that true love doesn't come from someone else, it comes from within. The love she had always longed for, the love she thought she needed from Jonathan, was something she had to cultivate in herself. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder of the importance of boundaries, of knowing when to say no, when to walk away, and when to choose yourself. It's a story of strength, of standing up for your own worth, and of realizing that you don't need anyone else to define your value. Olivia's journey wasn't easy, but it was necessary. It taught her that the love and respect she had been seeking from others had to first come from within. And once she learned that lesson, she was able to build a life that was truly her own, a life filled with peace, confidence, and the love she had always deserved. This is a story of empowerment, of healing, and of reclaiming one's life. It is a story of boundaries, of love, and of the importance of self-respect. And ultimately, it is a reminder that the only person responsible for your happiness is you. The journey of realizing the true meaning of family and love is one that can be painful, but ultimately transformative. For years, I believed that my daughter, Sarah, would have a perfect marriage. I envisioned her walking into the next chapter of her life with her husband, someone who would value her and support her the way a true partner should. My husband, David, and I were always the type of parents who wanted the best for our children. And when Sarah met Daniel, we hoped for nothing but happiness. I thought her wedding day would be one of celebration, with smiles and joy as she began her married life. To ensure they would start off with a strong foundation, we gifted Sarah and Daniel a beautiful home in a lovely neighborhood, just the kind of place where they could build their future. But the reality of that gift quickly soured when Daniel's family came into the picture. They moved in almost immediately after the wedding, with no regard for Sarah and Daniel's privacy or space. Daniel, whom I had always thought to be a good man, failed to stand up to his family. His mother, a woman of imposing character, took over every aspect of their new home. She walked in as if the house was her own, demanding changes and making sharp comments about everything from the decor to the layout. It wasn't long before she started picking apart Sarah, criticizing her for everything from how she cleaned to how she cooked. The more I watched, the more I realized that this was not the loving, supportive marriage I had imagined for Sarah. I had always known that love and marriage were not without challenges. But seeing Daniel's family make demands on Sarah and take advantage of her kindness was something I had never anticipated. I had hoped that Sarah would have the support of her partner, but instead, she was left to navigate the storm alone. When I tried to talk to Daniel, he would dismiss my concerns, saying that his mother just meant well and that he would deal with it. But it became clear to me that his dealing with it meant nothing. He was letting his family dictate their lives. As the weeks passed, I began to see the strain this was putting on Sarah. She had always been such a strong, independent person, but now she seemed more and more drained. She was trying to please everyone, trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, and the perfect woman. But no matter how much she gave, it was never enough. Her husband didn't protect her. Instead, he allowed his mother's intrusive behavior to continue. I could see how unhappy Sarah was, but I didn't know how to help her. I felt powerless, watching her lose herself in the process of trying to keep peace in a situation that was beyond her control. It wasn't until one evening when I received a phone call from Sarah that everything changed. She sounded like a shadow of herself, drained and broken, and she finally confessed to me that she couldn't take it anymore. It wasn't just the constant criticism from Daniel's family. It was the realization that she had been sacrificing her own needs and desires for the sake of a relationship that wasn't healthy. This was the moment when I knew that Sarah had reached her breaking point and that she needed to make a decision that would allow her to reclaim her life. But the decision wasn't going to be easy. I knew my daughter well. She had always been strong, but she had always been the kind of person who put others first. She had spent so much time trying to be the perfect wife and daughter-in-law that she had lost sight of who she was and what she needed. As I listened to her, I realized that she needed to set boundaries not just with Daniel's family, but with Daniel himself. If she didn't start standing up for herself, she would lose everything she had worked so hard to build. I wanted to tell her what to do, but I knew that the only person who could make this decision was her. It was her life, and it was her time to take control of her future. The weeks that followed were full of turmoil. Sarah had made the difficult decision to confront Daniel and his family. She set boundaries clear, firm boundaries that would no longer allow anyone to treat her as less than she was worth. The hardest part for her was confronting Daniel, the man she had once believed she would spend her life with. But as the days went on, she found the strength to do it. She told him that she could no longer be in a relationship where she wasn't respected, where her needs were ignored. She needed a partner, not someone who was willing to sit idly by while his family took advantage of her. The fallout was swift. Daniel was shocked. He didn't understand why Sarah was so upset. He had never seen the ways in which his family had been treating her as unacceptable. In his eyes, they were just being themselves, and he had always been able to overlook it. But Sarah couldn't overlook it anymore. She had spent years trying to please people who would never be satisfied, and now she had to make the choice to walk away from a relationship that was draining her. The aftermath was difficult. There were heated arguments, and Sarah was left heartbroken by the loss of a marriage that had once seemed full of promise. But she also felt a sense of liberation. It wasn't just the end of her relationship with Daniel, it was the beginning of her journey back to herself. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she could breathe again. She no longer had to pretend that everything was okay. She didn't have to suppress her needs for the sake of others. She could finally start living for herself. After the breakup, Sarah focused on rediscovering who she was outside of her marriage. She threw herself into her career, taking on new projects, pushing herself to grow in ways she never had before. She began to rebuild her life piece by piece, regaining her sense of independence and self-worth. I watched her transform from someone who had been lost and unsure to someone who was strong, confident, and in control of her life. But the road to healing wasn't without its bumps. Sarah still had to deal with the fallout from her marriage. She had to process the feelings of betrayal, guilt, and sadness that came with ending her relationship with Daniel. And there were still moments when she questioned herself. Did she make the right choice? Was she being too harsh? But as the days went on, it became clear that Sarah had made the right decision. She was free from the toxicity that had once held her back. Eventually, Sarah met someone new. His name was Ethan. He was different from Daniel in every way. He was kind, thoughtful, and above all, he respected Sarah. Their relationship developed slowly, without pressure or expectation. Ethan didn't try to control Sarah or manipulate her into fitting his idea of what she should be. He accepted her for who she was and supported her in ways Daniel never had. As Sarah got to know Ethan, she began to trust again, not just him, but herself. The new relationship didn't erase the pain of the past, but it helped Sarah heal in ways that she hadn't thought possible. She had learned to love herself, to set boundaries, and to demand the respect she deserved. And as she moved forward with Ethan, she realized that this was what love was supposed to be, a partnership built on mutual respect, not manipulation or control. The lessons Sarah learned from her relationship with Daniel were invaluable. She learned the importance of standing up for herself, of knowing her worth, and of never allowing anyone to treat her as anything less than deserving of respect and love. She learned that love is not about sacrifice, it's about mutual support, growth, and understanding. And perhaps most importantly, she learned that she was enough, just as she was. As Sarah walked forward into her new life with Ethan, I saw a new kind of peace settle in her heart. She wasn't looking for someone to complete her anymore. She was complete on her own, and that made all the difference. Her journey wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And as her mother, I couldn't have been prouder. The story of Sarah and Daniel is a journey of self-discovery, empowerment, and ultimately, the pursuit of happiness and respect. Sarah, a bright and capable woman, had always been someone who valued love and family. She had always hoped that her marriage would be a celebration of both an enduring partnership built on trust, respect, and mutual care. When she met Daniel, everything seemed perfect. He was charming, thoughtful, and came from a family that appeared welcoming. What started as a whirlwind romance turned into a commitment that Sarah believed would define the rest of her life. Her family was supportive, and they believed in the union, offering Sarah and Daniel a beautiful house in a scenic neighborhood. The house was a symbol of new beginnings, an investment in their future together. It was meant to be the perfect start to their marriage, but it quickly became a stage for drama and heartbreak. The in-laws, however, were not the supportive and loving family Sarah had hoped for. Instead, her new husband's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, arrived with an air of entitlement that shook Sarah to her core. They wasted no time making their demands clear. The house, gifted to Sarah and Daniel, became their new battleground. As soon as they stepped foot in the house, Mr. and Mrs. Miller assumed control, acting as though the home was theirs. The first insult was subtle, yet unmistakable. Mrs. Miller immediately began criticizing the house, complaining about the neighborhood and even the security features of the home, which she found to be excessive. But it didn't stop there. She then made a sweeping claim. The master bedroom, in her eyes, belonged to her. She felt it was her right, as the mother of the groom, to take the best room in the house, and she had no qualms about saying it aloud, in front of everyone. Sarah, always the peacemaker, tried to stay calm, but the disrespect from Daniel's family was growing more and more blatant. The Millers continued to act as if they were entitled to this new life that Sarah and Daniel were supposed to be building together. Not only did they overstep in the home, but they also made hurtful comments, questioning Sarah's ability to manage her new life, her cooking skills, and even her ability to keep the house clean. Their constant judgment of Sarah and her choices weighed heavily on her. But the real turning point came when they made it clear that their expectations were not limited to the home alone. They wanted control over the entire situation, and Sarah, at that moment, found herself a mere spectator in what was supposed to be her new life. As time went on, Sarah's doubts about the marriage began to grow. She tried to convince herself that love and family would overcome these obstacles. But the more she endured, the more she realized that the love she thought was there wasn't truly being reciprocated. Daniel, the man she thought was her partner, failed to protect her from his family's manipulation. His silence in the face of his parents' demands made Sarah feel increasingly isolated, as though her feelings and boundaries didn't matter. Her feelings of neglect and betrayal were compounded by Daniel's refusal to stand up to his parents. In those moments, Sarah's belief in the relationship began to waver. The person she had married seemed more like a stranger, someone who didn't value her as much as his family's approval. It wasn't just the intrusion of Daniel's family that left Sarah feeling abandoned. It was the realization that she had been sacrificing so much of herself for a relationship that was not built on mutual respect. She had always been the type of person who believed in compromise and putting others' needs before her own, but this experience forced her to question that belief. Was it worth sacrificing her self-worth and happiness for the sake of keeping the peace? Was it fair to allow herself to be treated like an afterthought in her own marriage? It became clear to her that this was not the kind of love she deserved. It was a harsh truth to swallow, but it was one that Sarah needed to confront. The turning point came when Sarah, in a moment of clarity, realized that her true value was not tied to her ability to keep others happy. She wasn't just a wife or a daughter-in-law. She was a person in her own right, deserving of love, respect, and independence. The decision to step away from the marriage was not easy, but it was necessary for her mental, emotional, and physical well-being. The day she made that decision, Sarah took a deep breath and called it quits with Daniel. She no longer had the energy to fight for a relationship that was based on insecurity, neglect, and emotional manipulation. It was a heartbreaking decision, but one that ultimately allowed her to reclaim control over her life. In the weeks that followed, Sarah immersed herself in healing. She focused on herself, her career, and her personal growth. For the first time in a long while, she could breathe without feeling like she was suffocating under the weight of other people's expectations. She took time to rediscover what made her happy, what made her feel fulfilled. As she grew stronger, Sarah began to see that leaving the relationship was the best thing she could have done. She was no longer tied to a man who had failed to appreciate her, nor was she bound to a family that had never respected her boundaries. Sarah was free, and for the first time, she realized that freedom was the greatest gift she could have given herself. But the journey didn't end there. Despite the pain and emotional scars of the breakup, Sarah was ready to move forward. She began to focus on her career with renewed vigor and energy. She had always been ambitious, but now she was determined to make her own mark in the world. And as she threw herself into her work, she found herself excelling in ways she had never anticipated. It was as if the weight of her past relationship had been holding her back, and now that it was gone, she was finally able to soar. During this time, Sarah met Ethan, a man who was different from Daniel in every way. Ethan was kind, respectful, and supportive of everything that Daniel had failed to be. But most importantly, Ethan saw Sarah for who she truly was. He respected her independence, her strength, and her intelligence. Ethan was not looking for someone to fix or control. He was looking for a partner, someone to build a life with, someone who could stand beside him as an equal. With Ethan, Sarah felt seen, heard, and valued in a way she never had with Daniel. Their relationship blossomed slowly, without the pressure of expectations or demands. For the first time, Sarah realized what a healthy, loving relationship could look like. She wasn't required to compromise herself or her dreams for the sake of someone else. Instead, she and Ethan supported each other's goals and ambitions, helping each other grow. It was a partnership in the truest sense, built on respect, love, and mutual admiration. As Sarah's relationship with Ethan deepened, she also started to reconnect with herself. She spent time reflecting on everything she had been through, the pain, the heartache, the lessons, and realized just how much strength she had gained from the experience. It wasn't just the love she had found in Ethan. It was the love she had learned to give herself. She wasn't waiting for someone else to validate her anymore. She had learned to validate herself, to stand up for what she wanted, and to never settle for less than she deserved. The culmination of Sarah's journey was not just in her relationship with Ethan, but in her newfound understanding of herself. She no longer saw herself as the person who needed to be fixed or rescued. She was whole, and she was proud of the woman she had become. The lessons she had learned from her failed marriage about love, respect, and self-worth were the foundation of her future. She knew that her journey was far from over, but she was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. She had faced the hardest part of her life and had come out stronger on the other side. As for Daniel and his family, they remained a distant memory. Sarah had moved on from the toxic dynamics that had once held her captive. She had found her own peace, and that was all that mattered. She wasn't looking back anymore. She was only looking forward. The road ahead was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah was ready to walk it with her head held high. In the whirlwind of family dynamics, love, and betrayal, the story of Sarah's experience with her former fiancé and his family reveals the complex layers of entitlement, manipulation, and ultimately, personal growth. At the heart of the story is Sarah, a woman who once believed that love could overcome everything. She thought that her marriage to Daniel would be the perfect culmination of her dreams built on mutual respect and shared values. However, Sarah's expectations quickly turned into disappointment as she realized that Daniel, whom she had trusted with her heart, failed to protect her from the toxic dynamics of his family. From the moment Daniel's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Miller, stepped into the picture, it became clear that they had no interest in treating Sarah as an equal partner in the relationship. Instead, they saw her as a mere tool for their own advancement, her resources, her family's wealth, and the house they had graciously gifted her and Daniel as a wedding present. They were unapologetically entitled, disrespecting Sarah's boundaries and claiming what was hers, as if they had every right to do so. Sarah, initially caught between politeness and disbelief, tried to maintain a sense of civility, but the treatment she endured from Daniel's parents became unbearable. They didn't just overstep, they took control of every aspect of the home they were meant to start their married life in. The audacity to demand the master bedroom, to treat the house as if it were theirs, and to humiliate Sarah with demands like cooking and cleaning were just the tip of the iceberg. Even worse, Daniel, whom she had trusted to stand by her side, remained silent and compliant, leaving Sarah to fight battles on her own. She felt trapped in a marriage that was no longer the life she had imagined, one where love and respect were supposed to be the foundation. But as the tension grew, so did Sarah's resolve. It was in the face of her fiancé's complacency, his inability to stand up for her, and his family's blatant disrespect that Sarah had an epiphany. She realized that this wasn't the kind of life she deserved. She wasn't going to be a doormat, nor would she continue to sacrifice her happiness for a man who couldn't see her worth. It was a hard decision, but one she had to make, the decision to end the relationship and walk away. This decision was liberating for Sarah, marking the beginning of her journey toward reclaiming her autonomy and self-worth. Sarah's breakup with Daniel wasn't just a breakup with him, it was a breakup with the expectations that had been placed on her for so long, the idea that she had to settle for less, and that love meant enduring mistreatment for the sake of keeping the peace. As Sarah moved forward, she began to focus on herself, on rebuilding the life that had been overshadowed by the toxic presence of Daniel and his family. She realized that her worth wasn't tied to her relationship with him, and that she was capable of achieving everything she had set out to do on her own. In doing so, Sarah discovered that true love, self-love, and respect could only come from within, not from the approval or expectations of others. She learned that personal growth came from making difficult decisions, and she was stronger because of it. Slowly, she started to see the woman she had always wanted to be, a woman who was confident, independent, and unafraid to stand up for herself. In the midst of her healing, Sarah also learned to recognize the signs of a healthy, respectful relationship. Enter Ethan, a man who was kind, supportive, and saw Sarah as an equal. With Ethan, there was no pressure, no expectations, and no need to compromise her values or goals. Their relationship was built on mutual respect, shared interests, and most importantly, the understanding that both partners had individual lives and dreams. Ethan never tried to control Sarah or mold her into someone she wasn't. Instead, he celebrated her strengths, her ambitions, and her individuality. With him, Sarah felt truly seen and valued. Ethan's support allowed Sarah to blossom in ways she had never imagined, and he was always there, offering encouragement and standing by her as she pursued her goals. Their relationship was a stark contrast to what she had experienced with Daniel. It was a partnership, one where both individuals grew together, yet remained strong and independent. But even as Sarah's relationship with Ethan flourished, her past with Daniel and his family lingered in her mind. It wasn't easy to let go of the hurt, the disappointment, and the feeling of betrayal that had come from the way Daniel and his family had treated her. She had loved him, and she had truly believed that their marriage would be a partnership built on mutual respect. The reality, however, was that Daniel's family had always viewed her as a means to an end, and Daniel had allowed them to control their relationship. But as time went on, Sarah realized that she didn't need to seek closure from them. She didn't need their approval or validation to feel worthy. Her worth was intrinsic. It was never tied to their treatment of her. The real turning point in Sarah's journey came when she fully embraced her own strength and independence. She stopped looking for validation from others and began to focus on the things that truly brought her joy. She threw herself into her work, pursuing projects she had always dreamed of but never had the time to fully invest in. The more she worked on herself, the more she realized how capable she truly was. She didn't need anyone to rescue her. She had always been strong enough to rescue herself. The more she focused on her career and personal development, the more confident she became. And as she started to see the fruits of her labor, Sarah realized that she was capable of achieving everything she had ever set her mind to. She was no longer held back by the expectations of others or the shame that had once weighed her down. Eventually, Sarah found herself in a place where she was no longer afraid of standing up for herself. She no longer hesitated when it came to making decisions for her own well-being, and she no longer feared the judgment of others. She was in control of her own life, and that was the most empowering feeling of all. As she continued to grow, she found herself in a stable, healthy relationship with Ethan, but more importantly, she had developed an even healthier relationship with herself. She was no longer the woman who stayed quiet for the sake of keeping the peace. She was a woman who spoke up for herself, set boundaries, and never compromised on her values. As Sarah's life continued to evolve, she came to a powerful realization. Love isn't about sacrificing your happiness for the sake of someone else's comfort. True love is about mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that both partners should be able to grow individually while growing together. She had learned this the hard way, through heartache and betrayal, but in the end, it had made her stronger. Sarah's journey was one of self-discovery, empowerment, and ultimately, the pursuit of happiness and respect. And in the end, she realized that the most important relationship she could ever have was the one with herself. The story of Sarah's journey through love, betrayal, and self-discovery offers a profound lesson in the importance of self-respect and independence. Life can sometimes lead us into relationships where we are asked to sacrifice our own well-being for the sake of others. But true happiness comes when we honor our own needs and boundaries. As we age, it becomes even more crucial to recognize our own worth, free from the expectations or demands of others. Sarah's decision to step away from a relationship that no longer served her and to build a life rooted in her own values and goals shows that it's never too late to reclaim your life. We may face challenges, disappointments, or even betrayal, but those experiences can help us grow stronger and wiser. The key message is that we are worthy of love, respect, and happiness, regardless of age or past mistakes. The relationships that truly matter are those built on mutual respect, where both individuals are allowed to thrive without compromising their personal integrity. As we age, it's essential to continue investing in ourselves, whether through our passions, our careers, or the relationships that lift us up. The most valuable lesson Sarah's story imparts is that self-love and self-respect are the foundation of a fulfilling life. It is never too late to choose happiness, set healthy boundaries, and live life on our own terms. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this video helpful, please make sure to give it a like and subscribe to Shrory's TH for more insightful content. Your support means the world to us.